I hope you're all staying cool, because damn, is it hot already. It's supposed to be like 100 degrees on Thursday. Anyway, this is written by A.K. McCarthy, Team CGS. I hope you all enjoy. When I started my new job a few months ago, there were the usual things to get used to. New processes, inside jokes, odd personalities, software glitches that just became part of the job. But one thing about this place was particularly strange. The chain emails. I'd seen plenty of those in the past. Emails one of your coworkers copy and pasted that contains some dumb joke, and you're supposed to forward it to 2 coworkers until it gets around the whole office. But these were different. These originated from outside the company. The email was some typo-filled conspiracy theory about alien visitors or politicians being part of a cult. They had subject lines like, "The Secret Plot," or "They look like humans." You know, shit like that. Every time you forwarded the email, one word in the email would change. And with every word changed, the message of the email became a little clearer. I almost deleted the first one thinking it was spam, until one of my coworkers warned me that it's a company tradition to forward the email until everyone in the office had seen it. There was a specific order in which we were supposed to send the email around. Dave in IT was always the first one to receive it, and Barb in accounting was the final recipient. Barb would print it out in its final form and put it up in the break room. People would then gather around and read it. Most people would laugh at it, but some people took it seriously. Oftentimes, after one of the emails made it around the office, I would see people frantically searching the internet for further information about whatever conspiracy the email was about. At such a serious company, I was surprised they would allow such an odd tradition to continue. Frankly, I assumed Dave and IT somehow designed these emails. I didn't understand how they worked. I just forwarded them to try to fit in. The emails kind of reminded me of my parents. They had slipped down the rabbit hole after rabbit hole, blindly following every get-rich-quick scheme and believing anything they read online. Every time I went over to their house for holidays, they had some different obsession. They became impossible to talk with, so I barely see them these days. And every time one of those chain emails hit my inbox, it was a reminder that this kind of nonsense was dividing families. And so I decided to mess with the chain email that came to me a couple of weeks ago. The email was something about looking to the sky for signs of UFOs. There was a line in there that said, "Don't look east, but face westward." I decided to make my own change, just to have a little fun. I combined the words "but" and "face," and threw in an extra T in there to make "butt face." I know it's immature, but opportunities like that don't come around too often. Anyway, I chuckled to myself and I forwarded the email on. 2 minutes later, I heard someone across the office scream. It was Edgar, the person I was assigned to forward the email to. People ran over to his cubicle thinking he was having some heart attack or something. But no, he was just reading the email I forwarded to him. But it wasn't the same email. Apparently, the little change I made screwed up the whole thing. The email was drastically different. Instead of crazy talk about aliens and UFOs, it was about Edgar. Specifically, it was about Edgar's obituary. It said he was going to die the next day in a car crash on the way to work. I never knew an obituary to be quite so specific about a cause of death, and I assured Edgar it was just a prank. I told him about my little edit to the email, and all of my coworkers looked at me like I had pressed the big red button at a nuclear plant. I apologized over and over, and even my boss had me go into his office to talk about just letting those emails go. Lots of people thought they were dumb, he said, but they forwarded them because the emails were important to some of the other people in the office. People took it seriously enough that Edgar was allowed to work from home the following day in an attempt to keep him off the road. I thought that was ridiculous. That is, until Edgar ended up dead. Edgar's wife said that he woke up that morning and told her in a monotone voice that he was going to go to work. She was confused because she knew he was planning to work from home that day, but she didn't think much of it. Edgar steered his car off the Muncie Bridge, halfway between his house and the office. I was devastated. Hell, we all were. But I felt personally responsible. I knew logically that my email hadn't forced Edgar to drive off a bridge, but maybe my mistake planted the seed that eventually grew into Edgar snapping. My boss gave me a week of personal leave, but that made it even worse. I was just alone at home, unable to think about anything except for those stupid cursed emails. At Edgar's funeral, I pulled Dave from IT aside. I asked him where those emails were really coming from. He glanced around, making sure nobody was within earshot of us. Then he leaned in close, the scent of cinnamon gum fresh on his breath. "I don't know for sure," he said, "but I do have an IP address I could share with you. It leads to a place in the woods outside of town. Hell, I've always been too scared to go there." He told me that this wasn't the first tragedy that had befallen the office after someone tampered with one of those emails. He said he originally flagged the emails as spam, but then people around the office started getting medical bills via email for services they had never received. Sure enough, each of those people then suffered the medical issues that were listed on those medical bills. So Dave started forwarding the emails that he received. The sick people in the office all made recoveries. Edgar was the first to die, he said, and I was the first person to tamper with one of the emails. Dave gave me the IP address and the coordinates of the spot in the woods where the emails were apparently coming from. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. His face was as hard as stone when he spoke to me. "As someone who fixes problems for a living," he said, "I'll just say that sometimes the best solution is to let the system do its thing. The more you mess with it, the worse it gets. Remember that when you tampered with the email, something very bad happened. The more you tamper, the worse it might get. I want answers as much as the next guy, but remember that there's a cost to everything." I nodded and I just told him to trust me. I went home and stared at that sheet of paper for hours after I got home. I looked up the location online, but the only thing the satellite showed was blurry pine trees. I slept on it, and when I woke up, I knew I had to go out there. I didn't even know if I could get to the spot in the woods. I assumed I'd have to trek through the hills into the forest, and so I wore my hiking gear. I also grabbed my sharpest kitchen knife. I felt totally ridiculous for doing so, but I had no idea what was waiting out there. Over the course of an hour-and-a-half drive, the terrain turned flat and suburban to hilly and rural. Exits on the highway got further apart. Cars got bigger, built more for hauling materials than fitting into parallel parking spots in the city. And by the time I stopped at a diner in the nearest town to the coordinates, I was very out of place. I felt eyes all over me and my little car as soon as I parked, and by the time I got inside the restaurant, I'd felt like a celebrity, or like an outsider about to get run out of town. But the waitress on duty greeted me with a smile and said, "Well, hey there, sugar," and led me to a booth. She plopped down a sticky menu on the table and said she'd give me some time to look over the menu. The place was called the Prophetic Diner, with a slogan that read, "We predict you will enjoy your meal." The menu items looked familiar. The secret plot burger. They looked like humans, chicken noodle soup. Face westward grilled cheese. I'd seen these names before in the subject lines of the chain emails at work. When the waitress came back, I saw her smile evaporate. She told me I looked ill, or like I'd seen a ghost. I asked her what the names of the menu items meant, and she rolled her eyes and smirked. "Admiral Calloway," she said, "kooky old man who used to live up in them hills around here, always yelling about conspiracies, handing out flyers about the end of the world and all of that. Well, nobody's seen him in forever, but he still sends out emails every now and then with new conspiracies. He's adapted to modern technology. She laughed at the last line and, well, I tried to smile, but I don't think I succeeded. I ordered a Lizard People BLT and a Coke, and I wondered if I was over my head with this. Then again, I thought, it's just some weird old man. I was in my 30s and I worked out regularly. I could take him, right? I ate my meal, drank 2 Cokes, and got back into my car. I drove to an abandoned warehouse I saw on the map that seemed to be a good starting point for my hike. I parked and I looked up at the gloomy woods. The pines peered down at me with the same disdain as the customers at the diner. The overcast day made the atmosphere all the more foreboding. Low clouds dragged slowly across the tops of the hills, hiding the tops of the pines for a few moments at a time. I double-checked that my knife was still in my hunting bag and set out into the forest. I followed a general route on my phone, but I had to take a couple of detours to get around thick underbrush and to find my way across a couple of streams. The birds sounded furious above me, like I was disturbing them, or maybe they were shouting warnings down at me. My parents kept coming to my mind as I hiked. For years, I'd wanted to strangle the anchors on the sketchy cable news stations that they watched. I'd wanted to delete all of the social media accounts that convinced them to try crazy diets, or that public schools were forcing children to read satanic books. My parents were in a perpetual state of fear and anger, and I wanted to get them back to the way they used to be. I saw the same signs in some of my coworkers, where they fervently believed these emails and grew to be so dependent on them. Hell, I didn't want this to be a violent encounter. I just wanted to talk to this person, this Admiral Calloway, to get him to stop emailing my office at least. It was only a half an hour or so before I saw the cabin. It was a tiny little structure tucked in between the biggest pine trees I'd ever seen. When I got closer, I saw that one of the trees wasn't a tree at all. It was a man-made tower. It was similar to a cell tower I'd seen in town, dressed up to look like a tree. But this one clearly wasn't the work of professionals. It was made of twisted heaps of metal and plastic, with pine branches stuck here and there to make it look somewhat like a tree. Thick cords ran from the tower to the cabin. I walked in a wide circle around the cabin at first, trying to get a better look at it and figuring out how to approach it. It looked abandoned. The roof was covered in branches, and the wood of the cabin looked slick with moss. Between the tree cover and the gloomy day, it was fairly dim in the woods, but the windows of the cabin were dark. Maybe the Admiral was out and about, looking at the sky and trying to see extraterrestrials. I took my pack off and I drew my knife. I kept it at my side so I didn't look threatening as I approached the cabin. I also got a flashlight out of my bag. When I was a few feet from the front door, I yelled a hello, but the cabin remained silent. I knocked softly, not wanting to startle anybody inside. I said hello again and called out my name. I looked to the nearest window, but couldn't make anything out within. I took a deep breath and I looked around at the forest. There was nobody out there, nobody sneaking up behind me. I tried the door and found it unlocked. I pushed the door open. A raccoon screamed as it sprinted out, and I thought it might have had a heart attack. I screeched like a little kid and nearly tripped as I backpedaled. The raccoon scurried into the forest and I was alone again. I turned the flashlight and shined it into the cabin. There were papers piled everywhere. Some were pinned to the walls, but most were stacked in chaotic piles on desks and even on the floor. Most of the papers on the floor were torn to shreds, presumably by the raccoons and his friends. There was a wood-burning stove in the middle of the room with a big box of matches on top of it. I walked forward until I stood in the doorway. I didn't realize how frightened I was until I saw my flashlight beam was shaking as I shone it around the little room. It started quaking more once it settled on the Admiral. He looked like a rotting corpse. He was emaciated, with his camouflage fatigues hanging off him in ribbons. A few wispy gray hairs sprouted from his wrinkled head, extending almost all the way to the floor. He slumped in an old wooden chair at a desk. My stomach turned when I saw that 3 huge cords, presumably the same ones from the huge tower outside, seemed to be attached to the Admiral. I slowly walked into the room, too petrified to speak, and as I got closer, I saw that the cords were indeed attached to him through his abdomen, and they seemed to be humming. It wasn't until I was almost right next to the Admiral that I realized it was his body that was humming, like his bones were vibrating as electricity coursed through him. His eyes were sunken, hidden beneath paper-thin eyelids. Oozing sores covered his skin and leaked neon yellow pus. "Hello?" I finally managed to say. The Admiral's eyes wrenched open. They were the same sickly yellow as the pus from his sores. He turned his head to face me, and I swear I heard his bones cracking and his skin tearing. A fresh wave of rotting stench washed over me then. The Admiral smiled, again testing the limits of his dry, withered skin. Then he opened his mouth, revealing a set of black teeth. When he spoke, his words floated on the noxious cloud of death-scented breath. "Look to the sky," he said. "Look westward. Watch the Arcasians approach. Send them your love through your gaze, and welcome them." He trailed off, mumbling for a few more moments as something green dribbled from his mouth. I wasn't sure what to make of this rambling, electrified, half-dead thing before me. I cleared my throat and I prepared to speak, but he beat me to it. He spoke in a monotone voice yet again, like he was channeling something from another realm. "Edgar Robinson, beloved husband and son, died on Wednesday after he drove his car off the Muncie Bridge on his way to work. Robinson was 43. He leaves behind a wife, but is now reunited with the Arcasians, from whom we all come and to whom we all go when we die." I gripped my knife harder, and I took a step closer to him. "Stop," I said. "Stop sending the emails. Stop poisoning people with your lies." The Admiral reached out for me, bones cracked under his skin as he did so. He grabbed my wrist, and an electric charge ran through my body. My vision then turned yellow, just like the Admiral's eyes, and the room before me disappeared, and all I saw was that ghastly yellow hue. After a moment, shapes began to appear and dance before my eyes. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen. Hell, I can't even describe them. They were spindly yet thick. They had many sides and corners, but everything seemed smooth and circular about them. Whispers circled around me in a language that I didn't understand. All I could make out was Acacia, over and over. The yellow changed to orange and red, like the color of sunset, before fading to black. I saw stars and could tell they were getting closer. I leaned back in fear, and I lost my balance and I fell backwards. I crashed to the floor and was suddenly back in the cabin again. I saw the Admiral's arm hanging limp. Apparently, when I fell backward, I freed myself of his grip, and I scrambled to my feet. I looked into those inhuman yellow eyes that pulsated with the electricity that ran through his rancid body. I lifted the kitchen knife above my head. "You're not going to send another email ever again," I said to him, and then I plunged the knife into his fragile body over and over. I was fortunate that the knife had a plastic handle to stop me from getting shocked. Yellow and green fluid leaked from his body with every puncture, though the Admiral's smile never faded. After a while, I could tell he was dead. Now, for good measure, I sawed through the smallest cord. The humming inside his body stopped, signaling to me that the Admiral was now safe to touch. I grabbed his bony body and pulled him away from the wall. Eventually, I tore him loose from the other 2 cords that were connected to him. They ripped free of his corpse with a stomach-churning sucking noise, spilling more yellow and green fluid onto the floor. I then loaded up the stove with as many of the papers as I could gather and set them ablaze. I fed load after load of those pamphlets into the fire. I didn't even bother to read them. I didn't want another of this crazy guy's thoughts to take up any more room in my brain. I wished I could do this for my parents. I wished I could take each of the conspiracy theories and lies they were being fed and set them on fire. But this was a good start. After a while, when I had burned through most of the papers, I decided to call it a day. I took one last look at the Admiral's corpse in a puddle of yellow and green liquid on the floor of the cabin, and I left. I walked back to my car and I felt like the birds were kinder to me this time. Hell, maybe they were thanking me, or perhaps they were just relieved that I was leaving. I drove past the prophetic diner again. The parking lot still had cars in it, but I couldn't see anybody inside. It was almost dinner time by then, and it seemed like more of a breakfast and lunch place anyway, so I didn't think much of it. I went home, threw away my hiking clothes, and took a long, hot shower. I thought about calling my parents, but decided to wait until the next evening. After all, it was getting late. Now, the next day was also my first day back to work after my personal leave. I was excited to go back and tell Dave what I had discovered. I'd arrived at my usual time to see that the parking lot was almost entirely full, like it was the middle of a workday. I was never the first one there, but I wasn't usually the last one. I was perfectly on time that day. I went inside and I walked up the stairs to my floor. The ringing of phones greeted me as I walked in. Nobody was picking up the phones, because nobody was there. It looked like somebody had ransacked the place. There were papers scattered around and chairs were overturned, and as I walked through, I saw smears of yellow and green on the walls of cubicles and on the old gray carpeting. I went over to the IT area. Dave's desk, completely neat and tidy. Nothing was overturned or broken. His desk was empty, except for one sheet of paper, and written in a steady hand it read, "He was right." I've been thinking about that message for a week now. Was Dave referring to the Admiral? Or was he referring to me? The higher-ups at the company said that everyone in my branch stopped replying to calls and emails at once, which lined up exactly with the time I disconnected the Admiral in the woods. They decided to close our branch, so I'm stuck looking for a job again. I called my parents as soon as I saw that empty office, and my mom picked up. I could hear the television in the background, and I could tell they were watching one of their crazy programs. We had a normal conversation and made plans for me to come up and visit soon. I've even been thinking about moving back to my hometown. There's not much keeping me here, and this region just doesn't feel like home anymore. But part of me wants to go back to that cabin to see if I can reconnect the Admiral and bring all my coworkers. To see if I can reconnect the Admiral and bring back all of my coworkers. But I can't go back. The Admiral needed to be unplugged at any cost. I don't believe a word he said or wrote, but some nights just before sunset, I turned to face west. I watched the sky turn orange and red and yellow, and I think about the shapes I saw and the whispers that I heard in that cabin. Then the sun disappears, the night descends, and I simply look away.